I simulated Trump's policies in Democracy 4, a government simulation game, and this is what happened. Over the last weeks, I have read hundreds of articles about Trump's promises in the campaign and his policies during his 4 years in government. I took notes and I matched his positions with policies available in Democracy 4. Trump supports record funding for the police. I go to the simulation and massively increase funding for the police. Trump wants to reduce the corporate tax. I reduce the corporate tax. Trump likes nuclear energy. I allow widespread expansion of nuclear energy. Overall, I mapped 100 policies that Trump supports in 7 different areas and I fitted it into the simulation. So are you ready? Let's see what happened. So finally, let's have a look at foreign policy. First of all, we have to talk about foreign relations because they remain very, very low. Other countries did not like the Trump presidency. And this is due to different things such as police brutality, harsh immigration rules, high tariffs, arms exports, the country being perceived as an authoritarian government, the border wall, high CO2 emissions, prison conditions, etc., etc. All these different issues made other countries not have a good relationship with the United States. Now, to be clear, the level of foreign relations before Trump's presidency was already very low in the simulation, but Trump's policies certainly didn't help. And the low level of foreign relations also had an impact on international trade, which remained very low, and also foreign investment, which remained at the minimum. But let's have a look at international trade because foreign relations are a factor in terms of promoting international trade. But as we can see, the main factor was the high import tariffs, which is not surprising because if you make imports more expensive, then there will be less trade overall. And also other countries will be mad and they will seek less trade with the United States. In any case, the good news is that the level of global influence of the United States went up during Trump's presidency, and this is mostly due to the very high level of funding for the military. As we can see, I kept the level of support for NATO membership and United Nations membership quite low, but I didn't totally cancel it. Now, I did this because even though Trump has talked, for instance, of leaving NATO if other countries don't provide enough funding for their militaries, I don't think he would really do that, and other countries are catching up with funding anyway. And so I kept it low because Trump, for instance, did these threats to NATO countries. He also left the Paris Agreement or the World Health Organization. But overall, I don't think he would actually leave the United Nations or NATO, for instance. I already spoke about other policies that have to do with foreign relations, but let's have a quick look. I built a border wall as Trump promised. I didn't provide a high level of funding because the deficit was big, but I did provide funding for that. I introduced very harsh border controls with armed guards at the border. I also kept a high level of arms exports, something that Trump supports overall. We made immigration rules very hard. We made it very difficult to immigrate to the United States. We kept a very low level of funding for foreign aid. We also introduced a total ban on refugees. This is something that Trump has promised during his campaign. And finally, again, we introduced very high tariffs. So all this overall made other countries not be very happy with the United States, and that explains why foreign relations were quite low. But the level of influence of the United States globally improved basically because of the high level of funding for the military. So overall, I think these are the most important points after the simulation of Trump's presidency. Violent crime went down by 30%, which is quite a lot, but proved quite persistent due to the social causes of crime. Normal crime, non-violent crime went down by only 10–15%, which is not a lot taking into account the amount of funding that we provided for the police and other measures. And this is due again to the social causes of crime. Drug cartels decreased by quite a lot but proved resilient. High police funding and tough sentencing increased police brutality and recidivism. It also created a sense of the United States being an authoritarian government, and the sense of safety overall increased significantly. And immigration, both legal and illegal, plummeted. In terms of the economy, the GDP remained persistently low despite various measures. A global recession and massive debt crisis were major factors in this. High tariffs were introduced, affecting foreign investment and relations. and unemployment remained high, even though it improved a bit due to broader economic problems. In terms of taxes, the corporation tax and the income tax were reduced, but that did contribute to a bigger deficit and eventually to the debt crisis. In terms of energy and environment, oil prices remained very high despite increased drilling. Wind and solar energy dropped from 20% to 5%. Nuclear energy expanded significantly, it basically tripled, and CO2 emissions initially decreased due to low GDP, but then increased by quite a lot. In terms of transport, car was the king. Car usage went up even more due to the high investment in road construction. Traffic congestion slightly decreased but remained stable, and public transport, buses and trains remained stable or slightly decreased. In terms of education, we had a huge problem with a skills shortage. So basically, there were not enough workers with the necessary knowledge and skills, taking into account the technological development, which went up. Funding for state schools was cut, and funding for religious schools and private schools increased. We did increase funding for adult education and for vocational training, but the lack of university grants and the lack of skilled immigration did not help to solve the problem of the skills shortage. In terms of health, we kept the same funding for public healthcare, and we introduced several measures to incentivize the use of private healthcare, but overall the quality of health of Americans remained extremely low, and this is due to social and environmental factors like poverty, drug addiction, alcohol, pollution, a food crisis, and more. We reduced funding for food stamps and for free school meals, but we kept the same amount of funding for pensions, disability benefits, and social care because Trump has promised not to cut social security, and we did increase funding for child benefits. Finally, in terms of foreign policy, the level of foreign relations was very low, and this was due to different Trump policies, even though they were quite bad from the beginning. The level of international trade was also extremely low, and this was due both because of the low level of foreign relations, but also the high tariffs that Trump introduced. But the United States overall did improve its level of global influence due to the high amount of funding for the military. So I think it's interesting to see what demographic groups are the most happy and the least happy with Trump's presidency and Trump's policies. And here we can see how the group that is the most happy with Trump's policies is actually state employees, but this is basically due to the police force and the military. Since we have extremely high levels of funding for the police and for the military, these policemen and soldiers are extremely happy with Trump. Then farmers are also very happy with Trump's policies, and this is not surprising due to the fact that we provided quite a lot of biofuel subsidies, but especially a high amount of agriculture subsidies and rural development grants. Again, this is all things that Trump has promised during his campaign or that he has done in the past. Then, quite unsurprisingly, religious people are also very happy with his policies because again, he supported school prayers in school. He reduced the secularity of education, so he gave it a more religious tone. He provided funding for religious schools and he reduced the abortion law. And here we can see how also wealthy people were very happy with Trump's presidency, mostly due to the low taxes. Patriot people were also very happy, mostly due to all these foreign policy laws that Trump introduced, like the border wall, the high tariffs, the harsh immigration rules, etc. And also conservatives were very happy, mostly due to the improvement in crime, but also other issues like the marriage tax allowance or the welfare fraud department. And also conservative people were very happy with Trump's presidency, mostly due to the high amount of policemen, the improvement in terms of crime, but also other policies such as the immigration enforcement force or the marriage tax allowance. And finally, some of the groups that were the most annoyed with Trump were environmentalists, trade unionists, liberal people, parents, ethnic minorities, and self-employed people.